Hello, everyone. Welcome back to OTD Military History. Today, we are going to be doing a AMA. It's been a while, so don't ask me anything. We haven't done one in, I don't know how long. It's been a while, maybe January. Anyway, so it's good to be back taking everyone's questions. Today is going to be a themed AMA. We're going to do what I've called the controversial edition or controversy edition. So any kind of questions you think that might be controversial, or if you just want my opinion on controversial historical events or people or whatever, and anything of that nature, if you want those questions kind of answered for me or my opinion on something that I may not necessarily avoided in the past, but not kind of tiptoed around, let's go right at it today. There's a disclaimer in the description. Anything to do with genocide and denial of that will get you booted immediately from the channel. So don't do that. And I won't be entertaining that at all. So we're not doing that. Also, before we begin, I want to start by saying it looks like some things are happening on YouTube again with monetization. Whole channels are being demonetized, seemingly without reason. So that brings me to a point of, that's not good from YouTube. So if there's ways on social media you guys can say something about that to them, that would be stupendous. Also, second point, if you like the work I'm doing and want to keep this going, please consider becoming a patron. It is much better for me if you do it through Patreon than you do it here. Just for that kind of reason. If they decide one day I am too will be demonetized, that will cause problems for me a lot for this channel. So if those who are not, please consider it. It would be really helpful. And my Normandy trip is upcoming and lots of expenses around that as well. And there's going to be lots of content coming with that. So thanks for listening to, or PayPal. PayPal is good too. I don't think they're going anywhere anytime soon. Just like James said there, be very helpful. So anyway, we'll get into it and kind of just start with what I've got here. So Mehdi came in before we started a while back. So Patton, true thoughts on Patton from a military perspective. That's an excellent question. I think he is over touted in a lot of ways. I mean, not to an extreme degree. I think he was in the position he should have been in. I think Army Command was the best he could handle, and he was in his position he was in the best position to be doing so. To me, it was Army Command is as high as he should have gone. He wouldn't have been able to do something like Eisenhower. He couldn't work with allies all that well. And I've been asked about Monty as well, and he's the same, right? These guys were not the good at managing people more or less in these ways. I mean, Monty obviously did it with 21st Army Group, but definitely Patton should never have been an Army Group commander. I think Army's as best as he was going to get. I think he was again in the right position. I mean, obviously the movie did a lot to help his image, and he's killed shortly after the war, so he couldn't really do too much touting for himself after the conflict was over. I mean, lots of people have done it for him. Also, I think his death plays into it, right? I say this a lot, and it's true for a lot of things, is death is sometimes the best thing you can do for your career. And right, because Patton dies and he's seen as this somewhat superior general than most. The one reason I kind of come to this conclusion is his philosophy with warfare in a lot of ways, particularly modern warfare, right? He had no issue with driving as far as possible, as quickly as possible. While that's good in trying to end a war in a lot of ways, in a modern war, it's very, very bad. Modern warfare requires all kinds of supply and support. You can have your hard driving your tanks as much as you want, and your men, your troops, but if you can't supply them, that doesn't do anybody any good. If you outstrip your supplies, you're just going to expose yourself to possibly being cut off. And that's bad for a whole army, right? That's the Second World War story there, right? This whole army's getting cut off and destroyed. Happens multiple times in multiple theaters. So that's not good. I mean, that doesn't happen with Patton, but it may have. And I mean, that's just a general idea for me, is you don't want to push too far too quickly. You can hard drive as much as you want. That doesn't necessarily present good generalship, particularly in the modern world. You have to, take everything into account. And this is why I say Rommel was not good either, because he didn't have the same understanding as well. He didn't understand logistics and supplies. And then people say he was good despite that. And I'm like, well, that doesn't matter. You can't say despite that. You can't leave that on the table in a modern war, because if you can't supply yourself, you can't fight. I don't care how quickly or, outfoxing whoever, doesn't matter. You can't do it. It doesn't work, right? This isn't, medieval armies marching off the land. It doesn't work that way. So that's kind of my thoughts on Patton. I'd say he's overrated in some areas. I mean, his command of his troops at certain times was very poor. I mean, we know all about the slapping incident in Sicily, the two of them, actually. That's not good. That's a bad thing for an image, obviously, in control of that many troops. It's not a good thing. I think he was too much of a hothead for that, which is not good for generalship as well. I mean, this comes up on other channels and through, the historiography and things like that. Mostly the best generals are the quiet ones, because they don't toot their own horn. They don't do any of that stuff. They just do the job. Like General Simpson of the Ninth Army, U.S. Ninth Army comes to mind for me. He's not doing that. He's just getting the job done, and a particularly tough job the Ninth Army had, particularly coming under Monty and all this other stuff. So, yeah, that's my thinking about that, particularly when it comes to the bigger names. Yeah, I hope that's a satisfying answer. I'll try to keep up as quickly as I can, but I know you guys are quick. This should be good already. Monty controversial. The answer is yes. Okay, so Susan, I gave is one of the patrons here. So she got left one on the Patreon page, I think yesterday. Anyway, so she asked if, and this is a quick one I can answer. She asked if any Canadian troops fought on the Chinese mainland. The answer is technically no. However, there was a group of Chinese Canadians trained in things like sabotage and espionage and, behind the scenes, behind enemy lines. They fought in Southeast Asia. They were aimed to go into China, just never developed that way. The war ended faster than they thought it was going to, obviously, so they didn't quite get to that position. But yes, there was no technical Canadian troops on the Chinese mainland during the war fighting, but these guys went to Southeast Asia, and that's pretty much as close as we got. And it wasn't just Chinese Canadians either. It was Canadian. Some other Canadians were part of this unit called Force 137 under SOE, who fought in China. So anyway, yeah, okay, next one. Scott said he had some good ones, and this is a good one. Arrow versus the Voodoo and the Bowmark. Okay, so we've talked about the arrow, the Avro arrow. For those who don't know, or maybe not Canadian, or haven't learned it from the Canadian fights online about this, the Avro arrow is presented as this top tech plane that's made in the 1950s, famously shut down under the Diefenbaker government because of cost overruns. Many people claim the Americans told them to do it because the Canadians were going to get better at aerospace engineering than the Americans. There's no evidence of that whatsoever. I think it's just a lot of the chip on the shoulder Canadian-ness that I talk about. However, to me, the arrow was outdated before it even took its first flight. It was an interceptor. Its purpose was to intercept Soviet bombers. Yes, there was a plan, or we sort of understand that the Soviets were going to use missiles and bombers in conjunction. Get that for a short time anyway, when the arrow was in production, and a little past when it was canceled. So that is a thought. I mean, I get it. But the cost overruns were ridiculous. Nobody wanted to buy it from the Canadian government. No one was going to be able to afford. They were certainly going to be able to afford to run the program without buyers. So I think shutting down was the right thing to do. Yes, it had an impact on the aerospace engineering industry in Canada. It did not shut it down. It did not destroy it. It still exists, obviously, and there's some strong companies. Bombardier is a Canadian company, and they are massive. Yeah, so I mean, the Voodoo did its job at the time. I mean, I don't know too much about the the whole Cold War in and outs of the aircraft and which is better in which conditions. I know every one of these aircraft has some issues. They never got the tests that they were designed for, luckily for us all, so that's good. And the Bowmark thing was a big deal. These are missiles, American missiles, equipped with nukes that were as a quote-unquote replacement for the Arrow to take out any of these bombers or what have you. Again, never used. They're eventually withdrawn and never under Canadian command either. So that's an interesting part in this. There's one in the Canada Air and Space Museum here in Ottawa. The thing is absolutely massive. So I think it's a big to-do over nothing. I mean, a lot of the fighting over the Beaumark was about having nukes and Canada having nukes, and even though they technically were never Canadian or under Canadian command. Obviously, they work in conjunction with the Americans on that one. But that's what the biggest protests were with the Beaumark. Again, it didn't come to a head, luckily. So, I mean, this is all academic at this point in the literal sense. It's just discussion. But I get your question, Scott. It is a good one. That's more of a Cold War deep dive. That would be probably better for David at the Cold War channel if he ever does an AMA, and being Canadian as well. But again, I think the Arrow is overstated in its importance and all of that stuff. Yes, there's some of that tech that is still somewhat used today. I get that, but it wasn't going to be this thing that was going to make Canada this leader in aerospace engineering. It just was never going to happen. Not the way the things were done anyway at the time, even before the Arrow, in my understanding. All right. Oh geez. Who was the best corps and divisional general in 21st Army Group? Oh geez. That's a good one. Oh Christ. Oh man, that's a tough one. Corps commander. Geez, yeah, these are controversial. Oh, that's a tough one. Hard to say. I'm not gonna pick Simmons. Can't. I don't think he was the best. He had some other issues besides the whole Monty thing that I've talked about at length. Horrocks, maybe. That's my best thought. He still made some mistakes, but he admitted to making mistakes and learned from said mistakes. I mean, he was burnt out. I mean, he wrote several memoirs that are very eye-opening and everything. And I think him leading 30 Corps through everything that he did, particularly the Reichswalls, which was absolutely brutal, was astonishing in and of itself. So I guess that's my best. For best, if I have to pick one, it would be Horrocks. And best divisional general in 21st Army Group, because I'm going to count this towards the end, would be Hoffmeister, Bert Hoffmeister. He's the best that they had at the end there. I mean, he was just the best divisional commander Canada had, and he's in Italy, and he gets sent up to Northwest Europe with Operation Goldflake. So he's the best. I mean, there's some issues with some of the Canadian divisionals. That's my guess. That's my best. You know, I can give up as a best hold up there. So Britain, Canadian, but because I just know Hoffmeister's story the best. I know what he was capable and what he was not capable of, and just the experience he had. I got to give him that edge. Just for that reason alone. So we've got, how would a Patton operate in a defensive battle? I have no idea. Not a clue. It's an excellent question, but I can't really answer that one, unfortunately, not because it's too controversial or whatever. I don't know. We never did one, right? Not in that traditional sense. He's always driving forward as he wanted to do. I mean, that is not something that he kept in his own philosophy. Again, to my limited understanding of Patton, I just don't think he would have done it as well, because that didn't fit him. He was in his spot, you know, as this hard driver, and again, talked about those issues, but I don't know. I don't think he would have done as well, because that's just not how he was wired, in my understanding of it all, especially with that armored doctrine that he helps develop. It doesn't hold well, as we've seen as the Germans tried. Those armored divisions don't do well on the defensive, right? They just get ground down into powder. Yes, that's a good point, Terry. I'm kind of coming up. And then I see a lot of Patton questions, so I can answer these kind of back to back here. Yes, the value of time, I agree, right? That a lot of them didn't. Also, but Patton didn't understand sometimes that you gotta wait. Sometimes you have to wait. That's also something Monty did not understand in a lot of ways. He did and he didn't, right? These guys are so complex. It's not just a simple black and white kind of thing that you can always say, right? they have good things they do, or they have these supposed philosophies that they follow and then just throw them out the window sometimes. Patton did it. Monty did it. Yeah, I mean, that's a big one, knowing when and where and how to deal with time and take it on your own advantage. It's absolutely wild. But yeah, it's an important point to keep in mind, Terry. Good point to raise. Oh, we already talked about Patton at the top there, Rob. But yeah, in my opinion, he was in the right element. Any promotion beyond Army was too much. So this is I had another question here from one of the patrons from Pat. I'm not sure if he's watching. Can't remember. You guys are flying here today, but he asked similar. So about First Special Service Force and other special forces, as he says. So along this line, so I'm going to answer this generally, if that's okay, Terry. Is you say, what's my thoughts on Wingate and the whole Chindit thing? So I'm going to answer this as well as Pat's question here. It's, to me, again, this is just my opinion. In the Second World War, yes, these resources are wasted. I do believe that. The Chindit stuff makes for good storytelling afterwards. Get it? I mean, Wingate was a bit of a weird dude, so that makes good copy, makes good stories, and lots of good clickbait kind of thing. So yeah, I get why. Like I said, I did the live stream with Woody about First Special Service Force ANZO. I think skills like that are wasted on being frontline divisions and then being put into these special forces that are put into positions they shouldn't be, like frontline divisions, or held on to forever and aren't used in the way they could have been used, right? Or are just used to be used. I get why, and there's a whole thing going on in the background with that. The Wingate stuff, especially, I mean, the impact is minimal at best. I don't see what advantage that brought to the Allies' overall war effort. I think these resources could have been better spent elsewhere and continuing the strategy that they did do, right? They should have been putting their resources into these units instead of trying to make all these fancy special forces that aren't used in the way that we think of them today, and all this massive stuff, right? Like there's whole commando units that different sizes at different places attached and doing different things. And that's probably where they're at their best, right? Like the DEP on the flank, taking out coastal batteries, same sort of thing in Normandy and in other places. I mean, using them as frontline units, I don't think was a good idea in the Second World War. That is said, they're still figuring all this out, right? This is new, all brand new, particularly for the Allies. They don't really know how to use them yet, and they're learning as they go. And at some points, you just got to kind of do what you got to do. So my feeling on that is it's overblown, right? They're not a war-winning unit. They weren't going to win anybody the war. So, I mean, overall, I would say, yes, the resources were probably, probably the best way to do it. No, I don't think so. So I kind of go with, yeah, it's a bit of a mess and a bit of a overstatement, particularly in the post-war period about this stuff is way overblown, which happens a lot. This is a good question. So from Rob, from who does the cop stuff. Yeah, I mean, yes, they did. Massive percentage, and they're working in conjunction with Lend-Lease with the Americans. Roosevelt and King negotiated all that, and it's all interlinked. Actually, I have a video on this. How to fund a war. It's called. You can watch it after. But how does the Canadian economy do after the post-immediate period? Fantastic. I mean, you hear the stories, right, about American factories making fridges and machine guns next to each other. Canadian factories are doing the exact same, right? They're no different in terms of that because the economies are more or less integrated, right? With the, oh geez, these names always escape me when doing the live streams. My head bounces around with the pact that they did the Joint Defense Board and everything like that in 40 before the Americans are even involved in the war. The economies are integrated in that way. So Canadian economy does fantastic. It's one of its boom periods is the late 40s into the 50s. And on, kind of past that, and then that kind of declines with manufacturing, which is it's mostly based off of. So yeah, it's massive. It does an excellent thing for the Canadian economy. They were concerned that there was a recession going to come because that's what happened after the First World War, right? All this arms manufacturing is no longer needed. Happens a little bit after the second until they figure it out again. It's like the Americans do the same, right? They're like, well hold on, maybe we got to retool and rethink about how we're going about stuff. That helped in a sense, right? Of keeping things going is this manufacturing of weapons. I'm not going to deny that. It's not, I'm not going to deny that is what happens and keeps the economy cooking, right? A lot of war production in Canada too. Moving on, I mean, Canada's a massive part in helping supply the Americans for Vietnam in many ways. So other than that, yes, the Canadian economy booms. The government makes sure it booms. You have things like the Veterans Charter, right? Gives them schooling and help with farming and all that kind of stuff, and the pensions and things like that. So that does a massive thing to help the Canadian economy with all of these people who are in uniform and coming back. It does massive. Yeah, it's a really fascinating topic, and I don't know the nitty gritty of all the numbers and stuff, but the Canadian economy responds extremely well until it doesn't later on, starting in the 70s. So that's an excellent question, Bruce. I was thinking about this today. Monty's success in North Africa, a function of timing of his arrival. In part, yes, I agree, or I think so. He wasn't there. If he was there earlier, is it the same? I don't know. Right? He pushes forward that colossal cracks philosophy of his, where he sits and builds up, right, and smashes through the Germans with artillery, and then can hammer blows with armor. You have to build up for that, right? At Second Alamein, because I was thinking about that, right? That these guys put in these positions because of timing. I think so. I mean, a big thing to me is the lack of another front for the Brits at this point, right? North Africa and the Eighth Army is getting all the attention, so that obviously helps Monty. Reputation, good or bad, right? He's getting all the attention because they want to push Rommel back to, the whole North Africa thing and secure the Suez and all that good stuff. But it's just a lot of attention. So if he was there earlier, would have been the same? Obviously I don't know, but I think he may have applied the same thinking. But again, he comes into that position, right, where after first El Alamein, he's in a good spot, I would argue, to push forward. And then of course, Torch comes, which obviously helps. Takes a while, but it helps, right? Obviously, and then they push them out of North Africa, and the Germans make stupid mistakes like reinforcing these guys, and they just take more casualties for no reason. So I think it is a portion of timing, but you got to be, what is it the saying? You got to be good to be lucky and lucky to be good. I think that's part of it. Because I was thinking about this too for Simmons. It's the same. He wouldn't have had the same trajectory if he hadn't been in when he had been in. But that's just two examples I was thinking of because in my mind, Monty and Simmons are like linked forever. Yeah. Okay. Canadian crossover with an opinion of Miles Dempsey. You mean my opinion or their opinion? I mean, it comes up a little bit. I mean, not too much. I mean, the grunt on the ground doesn't really care, I don't think, about Army Command. I mean, and then Army Command changes for the Canadians, right? First Canadian Army goes active in Normandy. I mean, I know Simmons, who's, two corps commander in Normandy for the Canadians, has some issues with Dempsey. Nothing major. I mean, there's a few things, but nothing, I would call egregious or any big mistakes or anything like that. But other than that, there's not much going on there. I mean, it's such a short period of time. There's more like inner conflict with Criar later, and how these are all going to work together. But that's later, and most of those fights go up to Monty anyway. So I'm not like a Dempsey expert by any means. I just know there was a few things from Simmons, but Simmons clashed with pretty much every commander he had. Really, other than Monty in a lot of ways, and he still even clashed with Monty in some ways. I mean, that's normal for everybody in this types of situations, but I don't think there's any national stuff going on here. I think there's too limited of too limited of a time and literally space in the bridgehead for any of this stuff to really matter. Right? They're waiting. They need to take con regardless of what anybody's bun fights over personality or whatever. Yeah, so it's more I would like to get into, but I just don't know about Dempsey as well as I do with some others, unfortunately. All right, now we're really cooking here. Dresden bombed. Yeah, probably one of the most controversial bombings of the war, if not the most. Obviously, the Nazis inflated the death casualties, the death toll of Dresden. We know that now. We should have known that then, but some people have always wanted that to be the case, right? High to make the Allies look bad. In my opinion, why was it bombed? As far as my understanding, it had to do with logistics. We can get into the whole thing about, was the need to bomb a city at that point? Did the Soviets ask for it? That I don't know for sure. I know it's just part of the overall campaign to keep them going because they bomb right up until the end anyway, and not just Dresden, right? Other places. It doesn't stop really until the negotiations start taking place at the end of the war. Various theaters, they keep bombing. So why was it bombed? To me, it's a logistical thing. That's as far as I can understand it. They just destroy that city to take it out as a logistical hub, which has been discussed at length by myself and others, how important logistics are. You can't just leave them to the side. Bombing cities is a bigger thing, obviously. Civilian casualties are to be avoided at all times, but that's not always possible. Really, at all, honestly, in massive wars, big wars like this, it's not a thing. It can't be done. So hitting them deliberately, I don't know. If somebody wants to ask about that later, about the bombings and strategic bombing, maybe I can answer it then. But this is about my opinion on why was it bombed. I don't think it was a terror bombing by any means. I mean, what good is that going to do when half the cities are destroyed anyway, right? One more city, whoop-de-doo. I mean, it sounds callous, but it's true. Most of these cities, Hamburg had already been burned. Berlin is being pasted constantly by this point. In other cities, the Ruhr Valley is getting pummeled and is being taken or being about to be taken. So I don't know. It's to me, it's about the logistics, and that makes sense in that regard of war, right? Deny your enemy any advantage they may have. Yeah, Crocker coming back to the Corps commanders. Yeah, he did. He didn't get along with Kriar because he was his only one under his command at the time. When First Canadian Army goes active, is the Brits is the first ones under his command, which is funny. In a sort of sad ha-ha kind of way. But yeah, they didn't get along. I mean, a lot of people didn't get along with Kriar, and I don't really blame them in a lot of ways. But yeah, they did not get along in certain cases. Yeah, with a German name, worse Glenn Carey. Doug Delaney, who's an excellent historian, wrote a book on him if you want to get some more digging into him. It's really fascinating. I mean, yeah, Peter, I agree. I try not to dismiss him outright. Not too much. He just makes some major mistakes, doesn't learn from them, and then denies that he had anything to do with it. That's where I have an issue with, is he can do no wrong by some and himself, which I don't really like. But yeah, he learns what he's doing and he does it well. He just makes mistakes, doesn't learn from those mistakes, and then complains that he's not in charge of First Canadian Army, even though he is for a short period in the Scheldt. It just seems like a lot of whining about what he thought was like a birthright almost, which doesn't make sense to me. Yes, he did do something. That's right. That's true. Yeah, I mean, he did okay. It's defensive warfare, right? It's not the same thing. It's just so different. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's that's a good point, Terry. It's not. Um, oh, Pat is here. Good. Okay. Well, maybe I missed him already. Oh, he's already gone. Yeah, I'm just catching up, guys. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's not black and white. Never is. And that's something I still struggle with as well. Right. So some people I just don't like because I didn't like them the way they acted. Simmons is one of them, but they're still good and bad. Right. Everybody's got them. He can be a superhero supposedly. Um, yeah, but they you got to balance those out and keep both in mind. Yeah, I mean, probably they're very similar in that way. Yeah, giving Monty giving the Canadians really tough jobs in Europe. Yes, and no. Yeah, they are given some tough jobs. Sheldon being one of them. Yeah, so I mean that's just how the plan goes anyway. I mean, First Canadian Army is given the left flank anyway. Um, they know is going to be the tough part. I don't know. I mean, the strategy is still being developed on what to do. The channel parts are tough not to crack, um, as we saw. I mean, Dunkirk is screened until the end of the war. Boulogne and Calais are not easy. And then you move into the Scheldt, which is incredibly difficult. I don't think it's necessarily him giving the tough jobs. Even go back to Sicily, right? They were the quote unquote reserve division as it was supposed to happen. That falls apart real quick and they're thrown into a difficult spot without without correct transport. It would have made things easier, but again, we talked at length about terrain, in Sicily. So they are given that tough job. It wasn't his intention to do so. I mean, I've seen the documents myself. I know he wasn't doing it maliciously. But yeah, so First Canadian Army is given the left flank, which turns into the Scheldt, which, as we all know, is difficult. But I think there's other measures that make it more difficult than necessary. So I don't think it's necessarily getting the tough jobs in Northwest Europe, especially. But then again, you have things like the Reichswald, which gets forgotten in terms of how tough it was and veritable and all that stuff. But it's not easy for anybody at that point, right? That winter plays into it, which I always want to keep in mind is the weather conditions, right? And then the bulge sets everything back and prolongs and makes things more difficult. So it's not just one thing. It's not Monty hating on Canadians. I don't think he did necessarily hate Canadians. He was very much in the old school class based thing anyway. And I thought maybe he thought they were all like lower class or something. I get more of the sense of that than nationality, because he wasn't a big fan of the lower classes in Britain anyway. So I think he may have seen Canadian more as that. So I don't think it's like we hate the Canadians, you take the tough jobs, because there's other tough jobs as well. I mean, talking about Second Armies, get some tough ones to take as well, right? Some tough roles. So I don't think it's as easy to say, and I'm not saying that's what you're saying, but some people do believe that, really. Yeah. Oh, sorry. Yes. Great minute. Going back. Yes. Mutual aid is. Yes. Mutual aid is technically different than Lend-Lease. Canadian produced stuff was done technically under Lend-Lease. Yeah, it's complicated, but yes, the majority of it was mutual aid. It's got many moving parts, as these economic agreements tend to do, and then some. Things don't last. Okay, then we have a question here. Can you large list of Lend-Lease export items? Yes, the Valentines to the Soviets, artillery. The big ones are artillery, small arms, massive amounts of small arms, and field guns mostly. A lot of those, and not just to the Soviets or the Brits, to the Chinese as well. I mean, there's a Bren gun in the Canadian War Museum with Mandarin on it, chamber to fire German ammunition. So that's pretty cool in terms of how that all went down. So those are the big ones, right? Not so much shipping. I mean, they do it, but it's mostly for our own use. So it's things like that. So they don't do the Shermans because the Americans make the Shermans. So it's a lot of small arms and smaller items. So they're not like big pieces, but a lot of field guns are done. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head somewhere, but Yeah, I mean, it's mostly that, but that's I mean, the amount is massive, like massive amounts of this stuff is made, which makes all the difference, right? If stuff gets destroyed, you just do it again, just keep going. Yeah, it's absolutely wild. How would that's a good question. How would the Ram have done as a battle tank? I think poorly. There's a reason why it was abandoned, because all kinds of reasons. How do I say this? The Sherman was the right way to go. Yes, it had problems. Every tank has problems today. Still, not everything is perfect. I see it in terms of the overall war effort and why I think it would have done poorly as a battle tank. You can look at the individual thing, and this is what drives me crazy about the German stuff, right? It's always big gun and armor and blah 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 blah. I'm like, great. If there's one of them, doesn't matter. If you can't supply it, doesn't matter. Anything, smoke could take it out, right? A fire could take it out. Some mud in a trench, like it doesn't matter, right? If you have ways of supplying these things, that doesn't matter, right? Just get a new one. So, I mean, that's how I tend to look at this stuff. You can't just take it down to some tank v tank thing in a video game, which a lot of people do. So I don't think the Ram would have done well. I think what they did do with it was the right call, using the chassis for things like APCs and self-propelled guns. They just had them anyway, and they were good for that. But I don't think they would have done well in the battle for spec, but also because of supply. The Sherman was the right thing to do. Sorry, I'm just reading. Any more questions? Just trying to catch up here, guys. Oh, geez. Okay. Geez. We seem to be living in an era where Clausewitz will be the leading theory. I agree. Closer study. Do you feel a closer study of Jomini? I don't know his theory, honestly. If someone can enlighten me, that would be great. I don't know that much about him. So I know I can say that the Clausewitz stuff is overdone. In my theory, in my opinion, we use that as a crutch, or it makes good peacetime talk. But when the stuff goes down, Clausewitz gets abandoned. I was literally just reading Terry Kopp's Fields of Fire because I'm getting ready for the Normandy stuff. And he talks about that in there and how it's just abandoned anyway. So, I mean, I think about this a lot. I'm not in, the professional military education. I don't do that stuff. I haven't been trained in any of that stuff. I've never been in that space, really. I've given one lecture at a staff college. So I don't really know the ins and outs of how theory is done on a given day. But when it comes to wars, I know a lot of that stuff gets thrown out the window real fast. And then it makes for nice discussions and fights afterwards. But so I don't know, honestly. I hope they move away from this type of thinking. I don't know what the theory is, unfortunately, so I can't answer that. But not because I don't want to. I just don't like Clausewitz myself. I don't see the value in it, to be honest. That may cause some ire, but I really don't care. Thanks. Sorry, I'm just reading Susan because she had to leave a while back. Why was still so controversial? I don't think he got along well with people. I don't think he got well along with people. I think that's why he's controversial. Maybe I'll send you a message about that later, Susan. But I don't know as much as I'd like about Sitwell. But to me, yeah, he's just doesn't get along with people, and that tarnishes his reputation. He just was kind of a callous guy. So this is a good one. Was Simmons right to sack Kitching? No, I don't think so. I think it was. I think it was the wrong move. I think he was not supported the right way with the closing of the gap. And then he just needed a scapegoat because there was already fights about this before it even happened. Like, it's still debated all the time today, almost 80 years later. And we're, still talking about this, still trying to assign blame. And Kitching took the blame. I mean, he's not the best, but I don't think fourth div was supported as it should have been. And I mean, mistakes are made within divisional structure. I mean, the force that they sent to close the gap was not big enough. They're preparing to push on the Seine before this is even done. And to me, that falls on Simmons. I mean, again, not just to blame him, but he's the corps commander. Got to blame somebody because that's literally what happens, right? Simmons is in charge of that, and that's what goes. They're thinking, push to the Seine, we'll halt them there again. Not as big as it turns out to be. They do damage, but it's not a second Falaise in the sense that they were hoping it was going to be. Some were hoping it was going to be bigger than Falaise, which clearly it was not. So I think that was wrong to sack him at the time, anyway. Maybe later, but not then. Stalin wanted Dresden bombed. I don't know. I've heard this so many times, not blaming you, but I hear this a lot, and I've never seen any conclusive proof that Stalin asked for it or the Soviet command asked for it. I've never seen it. You hear it, but the footnotes always end up in a dead end, unfortunately, in the secondary sources. Never goes back to the primaries. Strategic bombing, that's a whole program by itself. That's a whole series of programs by itself. Thanks for asking Canadian questions, Terry. I appreciate it. Yes. Sorry, just Scott's question here. Do you think the establishment of NORAD, and I'd say I'd butt that with dash NATO, led to the Canadian government cutting funding for the military? Yes. The integration of air defense has been a massive question since, 47, when the nukes go off, when the Soviet nukes go off. No apologies. Sorry, I'm just reading Betty's. No need to apologize for a link going in. That just removes them. I can't do anything about that. Anyway, yeah. So, I mean, I think so. I think it's an excuse. Sorry, it's a reason for something they wanted to do anyway. That's been a common theme across Canadian governments since 1945. King wanted to do it even before the war was over, scale it down. They had to bump it back up again, just like the Americans for, NATO commitments in West Europe for decades. And then, of course, the fall of the Soviet Union is used as another excuse to bring it down even further, really until the doldrums of what we are still dealing with today in Canada. I think it's a convenient excuse. I don't see it as an image thing, right? It's an integrated defense. You saw this with the stupid Chinese balloon of people complaining that Canada can't defend itself. The Americans had to shoot down the stupid thing. And I'm like, you don't understand how NORAD works or its purpose. It's integrated defense. That's how that works. And it's done in different ways too. It's just not as, sexy and exciting in the news, but we're doing things for the Americans and they're doing things for us. A lot to do with logistics and supply. It's not exciting, but that's how this goes. So yeah, I think this is a good question, but I agree. I mean, again, I'm not a political scientist. I'm not in that space, the modern stuff or, all of that. But I think it is an excuse. I think it's just an excuse that the Canadian government's liberal and conservative have been looking for decades. And it's still used as a kind of an excuse. I think we should be spending more. I'll say that out now in a controversial edition. We don't spend enough. We shouldn't be spending to American numbers by any means. Nobody needs to. But I think it's used as an excuse of why we don't have to, or it can just be pushed under the rug because the Americans are right next door and they'll help us. I mean, we did this with the Brits, right? The Royal Navy prior to the Second World War. It was that's taken care of. It's fine. So I think we're using that the same way here to bring down expenditures, which is to me a massive mistake that we've already paid for, and the people who have died in these recent conflicts paid that price. And I think more people will pay the price again because that doesn't stop. And it hasn't stopped in Canadian history either. It's gone on forever. Yes, Siemens could be a real bastard. That's my understanding. Sorry, it was Bonn selected as the post-war German capital. Yes, that's my understanding. Sorry, I don't know that at all. I don't know. I don't know the West German stuff and how it goes with the occupations and everything. I don't know what other city you could use. All right, you couldn't use Hamburg. Not in a good spot either. I don't know. That's a strategic thinking. If anybody knows some of the thinking that went into this, I'd love to hear it. That's a fascinating question, though. I have no idea. It makes sense geographically, though. given the conditions at the time and what comes. Were any, it's a good one. James here. Were any Japanese interned in Canada as in the US? Correct. Yes, lots. So what happens is similar to the US. It's done around the same sort of time. There's rumblings about it even before Pearl Harbor. It's done as a result of Pearl Harbor. So what is put in place is an exclusion zone west of the Rocky Mountains. So that's parts of Alberta and British Columbia in Canada. People of Japanese ancestry, Canadian citizen or not, are told move east or you will be interned. Now, internment is a thing, right? People get interned in wars when there's declaration of war. Happens in the First World War, right? Citizens of Germany and Austro-Hungary are interned. It happens in the Second World War as well. People are interned. Some are mostly released by the end of the war. Same with the internment. It doesn't last very long. They close most of the camps before the war is even over. And I'm even talking about the war in Western Europe. Most of them are allowed to leave these camps. They're not like in the US, though. These camps are not the same. They're removed, right? It's relocation more than internment, but that's been a huge debate. And some people say using relocation is more of a way of softening it and making it not sound as bad as it was. I'm not saying these camps were good, but they weren't like fenced in. They weren't guarded. They're just in the middle. Sorry, I think my allergies are kicking in. Spring finally comes and I get allergies. Like they're not guarded or anything like that. They're just in the middle of nowhere because they just took everything else, right? They literally took people's homes, businesses, boats, anything of value. So they had nothing to go to. They literally took them away and said, this is all you're going to get. Good luck. So that happens, and it's awful for those people. I've read the firsthand accounts and what these camps are like. It's not good. And then it slowly ends, or some people choose not to do that and go east. That's how a lot of families end up out my way in Ontario and even like Manitoba and out east. A lot of those families move to these places and then never go back. They don't go back to like BC. A lot of them do. There's obviously a good number of people out there. And so, they go back home, but a lot of people stay where they are. So it happened, and it was done for more or less the same way. It wasn't done because the Americans said so, like some people say. It was just done because Canada had its own history of anti-Japanese racism, and it was just put in place because it wasn't given a reason to do it. There was no credible threats to Canadian security from any people of Japanese descent, citizen or non, because we know this because the RCMP said so, and the government ignored them. And then it just turned into that whole mess, and then it went to court, and then it was upheld, just like in the States. And it was just a black mark on Canadian history, and it was sort of righted. There was money given and an apology given, and that's still a bit of a controversial thing as well, because the Hong Kong vets didn't get that for a long time. So obviously the Japanese connection is linked and noted, and then that went on for quite some time. But yeah, Canada has it, and it would seem connected to the US, but it's its own thing, and it was his own bad thing. All right, moving on. Nope. Not really. So the Canadians consulted high level regarding their resources. Yes. I mean, things like Dieppe had to get approval from McNaughton, who's commander at the time, to use one of his divisions. But they're not given, input. They're just sort of told, hey, this is what we're thinking. Are you guys okay with this? There's Canadian command in the North Atlantic eventually as well. So I guess you could say yes. But what else were they going to do, right? Convoys needed to be protected. So it's not like, stuff like that. So yeah, not really. Even with the RCAF as well, like number 6 group is a Canadian group, quote unquote, but not really. So no, not really. No, like they weren't really told about Overlord at all. They just knew that was coming. That was about it. Yeah, sorry, I forgot the trucks with Lend-Lease as well. Massive amounts. Sorry, I had a truck in my head because there's also one at the War Museum in their little back area with Mandarin all over it for the nationalists. It's a fascinating piece of history. I mean, you could be more controversial if you want. It doesn't bother me. Yeah, and that makes sense too for Windsor being right across the river from Detroit. paid them off. What did they do with all the convoy escort ships? So those mostly are the corvettes. Paid them off, sold them, scrapped them. There's one left in Hamilton, and one out east. Sorry, two. Yeah, mostly paid off and scrapped them. Didn't need them. Not really good for the Canadian the conditions, right? They're not meant for transoceanic travel, right? They're based off a whaler, and they don't do any good in the north. You had to build whole new ships for that stuff, and we're still doing that today. Sorry, I'm just trying to catch up. Yeah, Ram talk. That's a good question, Ian. So, do you think the Canadian Army in World War II was overshadowed by World War I? Yes. Today, including at the time, yes. Yes. The answer is always yes. Especially today. With the centenary of the First World War, it was all Vimy. I lived in Ottawa for half the centenary-ish. No, more than half. Anyway, the only big thing that got commemorated was Vimy. That's it. They did nothing else. Not even for the end of the war. I mean, there's the National Remembrance Day ceremony, but there was no one sentence got mentioned about it being the end of the war. So it's all Vimy. So anything that's not a Vimy is pushed to the side, right? Again, this is what my dissertation was on defeat and how Canadians think about it and how we present it. First World War, the Canadian Corps, this could be controversial in itself, is not defeated. Or any of the major Canadian units are not defeated in the traditional sense. Even at Second Ypres, they're not defeated. They plug the line. The Allies get pushed back, not a big degree by any means. Obviously, I know they get pushed back. I've been there and walked the original line and then the line they ended up at, because it's not that far. Nothing is that far in Ypres salient. So the Canadian Corps itself is undefeated. Can't say that in the Second World War, can we? So yeah, I think it's definitely overshadowed. All the memorials in Canada were designed for the First World War, obviously rightfully so, not a judgment thing. They just hardly built any for the Second World War. They just piggybacked off them. Literally, you can see this in almost any city, town, village that has one. The names of the Second World War, Korea, some have now added peacekeeping, and Afghanistan are just added to the First World War. I mean, I get there's a utility thing, all that stuff, but yes. I mean, I think in general, yes. And we don't realize how much. I mean, I've made this argument in academic circles, but I think the First World War has a bigger cultural impact on Canada than the Second does. Come up in arms and disagree with me, please do. But I think the impact of the First World War and how Canada develops kind of culturally is because of the First World War, not the Second. People seemingly wanted to forget the Second, who had served in it, who had done all these things, or they wanted to make it, the memorials to be more useful, right? Like there's memorial arenas across the country. They're memorial arenas for the Second World War. Most of them are now gone because they are old and are falling apart. First World War, it's memorials, it's statues, it's how we think about war. To me, anyway, I disagree with me. I would love to hear why. Not in a mean way. I just want to know. But I think to me, culturally, in that space of how Canada develops, it's World War I. So who's looking? Oh, this is good. Who's looking over? Well, both, right? Alaska, alert, right? Alert is talked about very often about this, but that's what they're doing. Yeah, and satellites obviously play a role. Both are interned, both Japanese and Japanese Canadian, both Japanese born. Some are sent back. At the war, they're also given the choice. We'll send you back to Japan if you're from there. And some people did it, and it did not go well for them because they were not accepted. Yeah, I mean, yeah, there's all kinds of individual stories like that. Yeah. Ooh, what can I say? Not much. There's not much. It doesn't come until later. They're usually bought secondhand, which has all kinds of problems. Still today, they're still not made for us. They're taken from somebody else. Uh, yeah, it's a bit of a mess. I don't know too much about it myself. There's a few of them. There's ones that are museum pieces now, which is kind of cool. I don't fit in them so good because I'm so tall. Makes me claustrophobic. But other than that, I don't know too much. They, haven't had a war role, quote unquote, because they don't come until later. We don't have them in the Second World War. So yeah, it's been a huge mess. Goes in the news every once in a while when there's discussions over them and costs. It's always about the cost. Always about the cost. Going back to Scott's question. But unfortunately, I don't know too much. I know people have done work on that, so you can do some digging on that if you want. I forget the name. She's on Twitter, or she used to be. Who does work on this? I forget her name. Maybe I can find it after. That's a good question. Do the deployments of Canadian military and home soil, like October Crisis, Oka, appear correct today, where they were an overuse of political authority? Could the RCMP have sold both instead? No, the RCMP could not have handled the October Crisis, in my opinion. A show of force worked because, I mean, I don't know if I talked about this before, but to me, the FLQ were like, it's a joke, but can't even get good terrorists, right? They were terrible at it. They couldn't even be good terrorists. They tried to kidnap people to get, advantages, and their demands met, and then they ended up shooting one of them and killing him, a trade minister from Britain, or trade and whatever, you know what I mean, representative, envoy, that's the word I'm looking for. Kidnap Quebec politician and let him go eventually. So I think that show of force really scared the crap out of them, and it worked. Oka is a whole other ball game because, so for those who don't know, this is maybe a little nitty gritty, but Ontario has its own police force, just like Quebec. So they handle what the RCMP would handle. Oh, sorry, the Oka's Quebec. Sorry, same thing, stands for anyway. So I always forget what it is. So they have, both of these provinces have provincial police forces. So they were outstripped, and they couldn't handle Oka on their own. That's why they called in the military. They asked. So no, I don't think it was a bit of an overuse. People do make the claim that October, the FLQ stuff was an overreach. There's a famous clip of Trudeau, saying, "What are you going to do?" And he says, "Well, just watch me." Right? You can find that on YouTube. It's quite funny, actually. You should watch the whole thing, because that's what he does. He says, "Well, too bad. We're just going to do it," and it worked. So yeah, some people think it's an overreach and civil rights, and that was the whole thing with the War Measures Act that came up again recently with that stupid convoy here in Ottawa. Anyway, so yeah, and then the Quebec police were just overwhelmed by Oka and couldn't handle it. Reason why I was thinking in Ontario is because there's a smaller incident in Ontario, a place called Ipperwash, where the military was not called in, despite it being a military base that was at the center of the controversy, and it was taken over, still under control of the band in the area, where a protester was shot and killed by the OPP, the provincial police. So, and that kind of quieted it all down, and they all just sort of went their own way, and they left them alone, basically. So yeah, I mean, sometimes it's an overreach. Luckily, no one was killed at Oka. Luckily, it was tense, very tense. Yeah, there is a Canadian, yes, massive. I mean, it's part of it, still is technically. The Americans paid for it, sort of ish. American troops worked on it. But it's a huge chunk of it because that was the idea, right? Connect the contiguous United States to Alaska. And then that's where you also have the Northwest Staging Route for planes that they sent land lease to Russia through Siberia. It's all connected. So yes, it's all done. I've done quite a bit of research on this actually for still hope upcoming exhibit at the Canadian War Museum, where they're going to be looking at the Canadian North Arctic. I'm not sure what the title is at this point, and its role and its history of warfare. So obviously the Alaska Highway is a massive part of this. And parts of it are still used as highways today. My understanding, it's extremely dangerous in some spots because they literally just picked a line and literally bulldozed their way forward. So yeah, it's definitely still a thing and a fascinating story. That's a good question. So Australians are insist on being consulted. How do I say this? Canadian military officials wanted to be. I don't think King gave a crap. As long as the boys weren't dying in huge numbers, I don't think he cared, because he wanted it over with. His focus was always domestic. He was terrible at foreign policy, but he was fantastic at domestic policy. Fantastic at it. Like, so good that it made up for other deficiencies. That's why he kept getting elected. Even during a world war, right? He was terrible at it. The Hitler part of his diary is just disturbing. How bad he was at this stuff. I think he surrounded himself with good people, right? Who were way better at it than he was. I just don't think he cared, so he didn't push for it, because he didn't want to be involved. They didn't want there to be a war, or let alone Canadian involvement to that degree. He just had to do it to keep winning votes. So I'm just trying to catch up here. I think, we should remember Second Eep more. We should. We don't. We have the Brooding Soldier, but people only really know about that if they go on a battlefield tour, or they learn about it at school for 5 minutes when they're 10 years old. Ooh, excellent question from Ian. How well prepared, equipped were Canadian troops sent to UK in 1940? Equipped, not great. Prepared, we tend to, and Stacey talks about this in the official history, we project backwards when it comes to the Second World War and the Canadians. For some reason, all the troops throughout the war are judged by 1944 standards. Is that because that's when Normandy is? I don't know. Screw the Italy guys, screw the D-Day judges. We don't even use them as the benchmark, and they're there first. Second, poor first div. Nobody cares. Even though these are the guys who were sent. First is first div. Bits and pieces, obviously. Things get changed around a little bit. But we don't judge them by 1940 standards. I think they're better than we thought. Same thing comes up with Hong Kong, so I'm going to obviously talk about that. They were better than we think. Obviously, they don't get the test in 1940. They get the test in Hong Kong, late 41, as we know. And I think they held up as well as they could have at the time, given the resources and the situation. So equipped, not great. Canada is not ready in 1939 for war. That's well known, not even remotely at all, for all kinds of reasons. So equipped is certainly definitely not well equipped at all. But after Dunkirk, they're well equipped because they're all that's left. But prepared for the time as best as they could be ish. Again, we don't know, right? We don't know until much later. There's trouble with the major exercises that go on later on. It's one of the reasons why McNaughton gets fired. Spartan plays a huge role into that. Exercise Spartan. He ran afoul of some people as well. Constant theme in Canadian military history, particularly modern. But as good as it could have been under the circumstances. They weren't bumbling idiots who didn't know what they were doing. I'll say that much. What, did somebody say I was short? So I'm a bit behind here. Getting closer though. Sorry. October Crisis there's a group called the National Liberation Front of Quebec, or I don't know what it is in French. FLQ is what they're called. So separatism. They wanted Quebec separate. So they started using terrorism, bombings, and kidnappings to make that happen, and failed miserably, big time. And then Oka is a band of, I believe, I forget the band. Mohawk? Yeah, Mohawk band. Who had their land taken by a developer, and they occupied it to stop the developments. I believe it was over a golf course. And then it got almost violent. Then they armed. Then the Quebec police were armed, and then they called in the military, called in the army. And it almost turned bad. There's a famous photo of a soldier who ended up doing porn, of all things, and a guy from the Mohawk band, I forget their names, staring each other down. You'll see it when you Google it, if you haven't already. Could you talk about the Canadian government barring families in the U.S. giving ration items to Canadian family members during World War II? Can you talk about, Canadian government barring families in the U.S. giving ration items to Canadian family members? So you're saying Americans sent stuff to Canadians? You may have to think that one. Yeah, I don't know about that one. Yeah, maybe I don't understand. Is that what it is? I don't know. I don't know that one. Yes, sorry, I got it backward. Pierre Laporte was the one who was killed, and the diplomat was let go. Yes. What was Canada's role in the DO line system? Massive. It was like a 50-50 operation almost. Canadians, massive supply, land, obviously. A lot of it's in Canada. This is the distance early warning line, one of the lines, the furthest north one, and the earliest one at the time. It's been since replaced by a different line. That's the same concept of intercepting Soviet incursions, whatever those may be. Basically radar stations across the north. So they're manned by Canadians, supplied by Canadians, like 50-50. It's actually one of the biggest and I say best done cooperations between Canada and the United States when it comes to defense, other than the permanent defense board, right, which is part of this. Yeah, massive. It wasn't just the Americans doing it. It was like a 50-50 almost. And give and take, right? It depended on what was being done and how it was being done. I mean, it leads to some wild photos in the sense, I think, give a good indication of this. Because again, I did a huge chunk of research on the DO line as well for that upcoming exhibit. And I just think the photos are cool because it's like American kit from the Second World War being used to supply this stuff. Like bulldozers are literally coming off LCVPs, Higgins boats, which is, you don't see that, right? You don't see that anywhere else in Canadian military history because they weren't using them. So it's so crazy to see. And then there's Americans working with Canadians to do like diving to clear obstacles where they want to put these places so they can get these landing ships ashore and to dump the stuff. It's wild. There's been work done on it. I don't think there's like a massive overall big volume on it. And I mean, there's tons of videos on YouTube. Some of them are pretty good. I don't know any off the top of my head to recommend, but it was massive and a really fascinating story, actually. Yeah, I mean, Iperwash is after Oka, so that plays into it. Yeah. Nope, not at all. Churchill said, "We don't want Canadians in North Africa. We've already relied too much on the Aussies, Kiwis, and the Indians. We don't want Canadians here because it'll look bad for propaganda purposes." And I'm using propaganda finding out about what the Germans did and when that term changes. Because Churchill literally says this. And like we discussed, King was okay with it. He didn't want it anyway. Big part of that, right, is the Hong Kong stuff, why it happens, because Canada's not involved in North Africa. So no, they don't want to get involved in Torch. I mean, half of it comes from the US anyway. But they didn't want Canadians in North Africa. Outright said no. And they weren't really offered anyway. Not with approval. Yes, chunk of 1st Division were sent to France in 1940, where they abruptly turned around and left way more than their kit than they should have. Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying they were great in 1940, but there was training. It's not like they were just, here's a gun, good luck. They were training as best as they could, and the small permanent force that was in place prior to 39, again, I think they did the best they could, and it's better than people give them credit for. They were really just groping in the dark and making it up as they went along, and I think they did the best they could, and it wasn't as bad as people want it to be. Oh, yeah, the submarines. Yeah, I bash my head a lot. Yes, the Front de Liberation du Québec, FLQ. Yeah, for a golf course, yeah. Yeah, course extent. There it is. Course extension to be built over a burial ground. That's what it was. Yes, and then Canada was responsible for cleaning up the DO line, and massive contamination still sort of ongoing. There's, I think, a little bit left. Yeah. Ooh, that's an excellent question. So, is there a good book on Arthur Currie? Yes, Tim Cook's book is excellent, but it looks at Sam Hughes at the same time, which I think is a great way of going about this. Sorry, I just saw Scott's thing. Blind spot here. Yes, so there is one by Hyatt, A.M.J. Hyatt. Small, it's tiny, it's a bit old. It's not too bad. not too bad. But I think the way Tim Cook has done it is fantastic because Curry and oh my god, forget his name. I just said it. You know, comparing the two, the Madman and the Butcher is the name of the book. God, I lose my brain after a while. I think it's fascinating. Where Hughes, geez, Sam Hughes, comparing them together is fantastic because those two figures will be forever linked in Canadian military history. Whether they definitely didn't want them to be linked, but they are now. That's a good way to go about it. But yeah. My grandparents were busted a couple times during World War II by customs trying to bring ration food to the family. Probably, I don't. That's weird. I have never heard of this. So it's coming from the U.S. and it's rationed in Canada, and they were told they can't have it. Huh. Huh. Weird. I have no idea. I've never heard of this. They got busted at Sarnia in the 40s. Huh. Border back then was just nothing. My grandfather stopped his car on the Ambassador Bridge in the middle to take a photo. So to get busted at customs, that must have, what did they do? Must have been like, look at me. Anyway, sorry. Sorry, I'm just catching up. They did. Yeah. A brigade group ish. I don't think they were all ever there at the same time, but Canadians stopped on the way. Like they were allocated to one div in Britain, but they were put into Iceland first and then sent over slowly to then be replaced by Americans before Pearl Harbor. So yes, they did. Yeah, so it was a thing, but no, not long term. It was never the plan because this is pre Pearl Harbor. It's like, well, this is kind of an illegal invasion and occupation anyway. So, hey, Uncle Sam, can you take this off our hands? You know. So that was always the plan. It was never really like, hey, we'll put the Canadians there instead. The Canadians were part of that transitional period, so to speak. But yeah, they were there. Actually, there was more debate about sending Canadians to Iceland than there was to sending Canadians to Hong Kong in the Canadian War Cabinet, which blows my mind. I'll talk about this in my dissertation if you want to read that later. You can just go to that section. It's wild. Like, it makes no sense. None. Oh, thanks. Bye, Chris. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense, Pat. It's probably black market. Okay, so that's, I think I'm caught up finally. So if you have more, I'm firing away. I have a few from Pat if he's still here, because they are really interesting. I was going to bring them up, but I'm not going to. So some good ones here. Actually, maybe I have to. Oh, yeah, I'll do it. Hold on. I'm going to share screen. Share screen. Oh. So the one that I think is good here, the second one is, was Hitler a strategic genius held back by, undermined by his junker generals? No. Was he an incompetent amateur who fought against the professionalism of his general staff at every turn, thus losing the war for Germany? Also, no. Or is this a false dichotomy oversimplifying the complex topic of political military interaction? Yes. To me, it's the third one. He's no genius. He's not completely incompetent when it comes to some decisions. I mean, he's drug-addled and insane. But I don't think it's that either. I think just because we use the general staff system doesn't mean that those in the general staff of those who invented it were the best at everything that they had ever done. I've said this time and time again, and will never not. Happening earlier with Manstein earlier today on YouTube for me. About someone saying he's this war genius, and I went, no, never genius. Anyway, wild. Anyway, so no, I don't think it's that. So, and I think your follow-up question here, Pat, is the important part here. Is I don't think this debate has any usefulness because other than um, it's a finger pointing thing for the German generals in a way to basically secure cushy NATO jobs after the war. It happens. I don't think it's really a useful thing because, as we know, total or near total war isn't lost because of one reason. Not because Hitler was an idiot. It wasn't because the general staff wasn't listened to and had major, amazing plans that were going to fix everything. It wasn't that. It was they took on a war they couldn't win anyway. So that's to me, it was a war they couldn't win anyway, especially when they started pissing off the Americans, which was fairly early. It's not as late as people think it was. Like it was fairly early that they were doing stupid things. As I always say, don't mess with American boats. Relating to this, don't fuck with American boats because they'll come back and fuck you up. Yeah. So I mean, it's something they weren't going to win anyway. So I don't see it being this big thing anyway. I think it's just people like to talk about the Germans infinitum after the fact. And yeah, I mean, it's just something people like to talk about because they view the German military as the greatest thing on the face of the planet during the war. And there's always a reason things went poorly, and Hitler's usually blamed. So I think it's more of a almost navel gazing at this point. But yeah, so now we got some more questions here. Tiger Force. How large would Canada's involvement have been if the atomic bomb hadn't stopped? Blah, blah, blah. Initially, it was supposed to be... can't remember. Initially, 3 squadrons were taken. 3? Geez, I was just doing work on this. I can't remember the number. There's just some great photos of them transferring the Lancasters across the Atlantic of squadrons going home early, quote unquote, to join Tiger Force. It's a number of squadrons. It wasn't going to be maybe a couple, 2 wings, maybe. I can't remember off the top of my head. It's somewhere. Maybe it's in the official history. I can't remember. But it wasn't going to be group size, so nothing that big. But it was going to be a good number, right? They were going to a good number. We're going to be involved in probably same casualty results as Europe. It was going to be involved, so it wasn't going to be just what's the word I'm looking for here? Just a show of we're here. It was going to be a substantial contribution for the Canadian numbers, particularly as the war moved on. There were plans to do this, but again, goes to the Uganda thing, and I see Terry bringing up the division. Canadian service after May 8th, 45 is volunteer only. Voluntary. I'm trying to say voluntarily only. So it's only volunteers. So that adds another thing to it. So you can't really do that. Yeah, so it was going to be not an insignificant amount. There's work on this, and I have it somewhere. I just don't have the numbers off the top of my head. There was a huge debate about what to do, Navy, Air Force, and Army, because they had time on their hands, and no one thought the war was going to end in summer 45. They would not expect that, Canadian government especially, even though they knew about the Manhattan Project. Anyway, no, they never took responsibility for anything, including the Holocaust. I don't know much, unfortunately. I wish I did. I'm sure there was lots. Probably the same as everybody else. But I can't say for sure, unfortunately. Sorry, Ian. So this is a good question. And thank you for the support of the channel, by the way. Were the Germans good at defense considering what appears to be overwhelming Western power? No, it's not an obvious question. I think about this a lot because especially coming up with the Normandy project and what that campaign looked like and this whole claim of eliteness and blah, 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 blah. I like to break this down simply, right? An attacking force is supposed to outnumber the defending force. So what does that say about the defenders, right? Defending is quote unquote easier than attacking. You can prepare your positions. You can know the ground better. You can prepare for almost every eventuality that you can ish. And you usually have more time on the ground than those doing the attacking. So I like to think about this in many ways. Defenders can outdo their numbers based on a whole set of factors, right? And digging in is a big one that it's so simple that literally getting under the ground makes a difference. The things that people have survived by digging a hole in the ground is wild. Like it's crazy. So I tend to think of this in one way because I hear this a lot, and people think it's just because of the war crime stuff. I just don't think that these units were that good to begin with because defense is easier than being on the offensive. And being on the offensive on a hostile shore, it's not that far, but still on a hostile shore, you have to supply everything across water is not easy. I'm not saying supply by land is easy either, but getting across the channel is not easy, and to have to keep doing it in small space, not easy. So I look at this in terms of the First World War, right? Because I tend to think about this from the Canadian perspective, obviously. So I hear, the SS is elite. I'm like, well, they're on the defensive most of the time. I'm talking about Normandy specifically in this case, as an example. They're on the defensive pretty much all the time. They counterattack any offensive actions they do take, and poorly for them with high casualties, and small and big. I'm talking company level all the way up to Operation, Luttich. It doesn't go well. So I think about this in terms of the First World War. People call the SS elite for all kinds of reasons. People tend to try to get me to see it as, oh, they're elite because of the kit and because they're elite Nazis, which I agree with. But people think there are still elite fighters and use examples of what they did in Normandy on the defensive. So by that logic, all those divisions in the First World War of the Germans were elite too because they stopped the Allies from advancing. You can turn this logic on its head. So all of those divisions no one talks about in the First World War, why aren't they called elite? They stymied the Allies for years. Why aren't they elite? Right? No one's calling them elite because they stopped the Allies. I think it's because of the Nazi stuff. We're in the controversy stuff, and we're in the deep part of this. So those are still here, are still watching. I don't think anybody's going to watch this far later, but I think it's because of the Nazi stuff. The amount of people who love the Nazi stuff, they don't say it out loud, or some won't even admit it to themselves. But they like the kit, they like the look. They don't care about the murder and the death and the genocide. It makes good looking, cool models, and they're so good. I think a lot of people are just shitty and then do this. And I think it clouds their judgment. And I'm talking about academics as well. I am no fan of Deste because of his basically seems like he wanted to make out with Whitman if he could have. It's just, yes. So there is a good at defensive thing about this, but being good at defensive doesn't take that much. Not as good as being at offensive and having to adapt, right? Defense is defense. You dig in, you use the ground to your advantage, and you stop them. You're not trying to move forward. Counterattacks, blah, 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 are not attacking. They're counterattacking. It's different. You're on your own ground, quote unquote. It's not the same. So, a lot of people are good at defense because it's just easier, again, quote unquote. I hope that answers your question. Yeah, like and Miley are in the same sentence. Yeah. Yeah, Terry's right here too. Well, yes, but that's German doctrine, right? Yeah, counterattacking after being evicted from your defensive position seems a bit counterintuitive. Yes, unless you do it purposefully, which they did sometimes. But half the time they're just booted out because they couldn't hold it. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, Terry, I've done tons of stuff on the 12th SS on my channel, short and long. I'm glad people enjoyed that line. I'm going to put that into its own video. I'll make a short out of it or something. Oh, perfect. Thank you. Yeah, yes, everyone needs training, and it's about child soldiers. I have a bit of an issue with the 12th SS specifically calling them, children. Just because it's called Hitler Youth doesn't mean they were children. They were just members of the Hitler Youth and of age to serve. A little younger, they did drop some of the requirements. They did that later for everybody anyway. So they weren't children. But yes, it's all about training and leadership and how you go about doing that. The SS did it differently. Yeah, no, it's not Whitman. It's not Walt Whitman. Michael Wittmann. Well, it can be, right? Because you're right, Chris. It can be if you don't know that it's going to come. They knew it was coming, so they took the advantage of that a lot. Sorry again, Ian, but this is an easy answer. No. Nope. Not at all, actually. Ad hoc is how it's best to describe it. So this is an old live stream long way back. Looking at this, it's called Civil Affairs and how they go about doing this. So if you want to, you can watch that out. It's a bit rough because it's an older live stream, but with the author of the book, whose name I feel awful for forgetting off the top of my head. He does, it used to be called Cool Canadian History. That was a podcast. Anyway, sorry, I forget his name. If anyone can find it for me, that would be fantastic. Anyway, so that is a specific unit to do that. No, they are not French Canadians to do that. Experience was gained in Italy on how to kind of do this. And we talk about that because I read the book. It's fantastic. It's academic, so it's not going to get the attention, and it's not the most exciting, quote unquote, for military history. So no, none of that happens. Obviously, there's a kind of an ad hoc way because the Chaudière, which is the first French unit to land, right? They're part of the assault wave, or sorry, they're the reserve of the 8th Brigade, which was one of the assault brigades. They just kind of ad hoc have better relations because they can talk to each other. And the French, the Normans, were like, "Why do you sound kind of like us, but old?" Because the accent is different, right? Because it's an old accent from France. Because the majority of those who went to at the time New France were from Normandy. Most of the voyages, like from Cartier and all those guys, left from Normandy, like Le Havre and Honfleur and things like that. Yeah, so no, none of that. You think they would, but I mean, the relations between Quebec and France at the time were not the best. They didn't really see France as kind of their ancestral homeland anymore. They felt abandoned by France because they were abandoned. They were left. It was Terry right here. They understood each other basically. It was really weird to see a bunch of French-speaking guys in British uniforms. It was weird. They were so caught off guard, and then that's when the Calvados and the wine starts coming out, and then everybody just gets drunk anyway. So unfortunately, no. And then De Gaulle did his own thing because he came ashore on Juno. Right? There's a monument to him there, right there in Courcelles, which I'm staring near. Anyway, it's you think that that's something they would do, but no, they weren't. You think they would, but they didn't. Yeah, that's a good point from Scott here. It's about the edge off. Yeah, the Icelanders felt they were being invaded, just not violently. Got their independence though, right? Yeah. I wonder if he yodeled like Slimwood. maybe Deste would have when he was making out with him. Yeah, they had trouble talking to each other because it's different, right? It's very different. It's not the same. Different, lingo and slang. Talk about Canadian occupation forces in Japan. Not many, not a lot. Minor amounts. Things like ships, things like that. There's the trial of Kano Inouye, who's a Canadian-born Japanese soldier who basically kills and murders POWs. He's hung for treason in Japan. That's about it. There's not much. Obviously, there's Canadian involvement because Canada declares war on Japan, but it's an American show largely, right? As we know, with Brits, doing the things in Hong Kong and things like that. I mean, the Canadian occupation forces are tiny, relatively comparison to everybody else anyway. Even in Germany, they're not there for long. A few hand-picked individuals are sent as a few individual units, small, are sent as a token. representation of Berlin, and then there's a small chunk, and then most of them are sent to the Netherlands anyway. And the Dutch are saying, thanks for the liberation. Get the hell out of here. You're causing all kinds of trouble and sleeping with our women and drinking all the time and fighting and stuff. Stop doing that. Go home. Thank you, but bye. So there's not much really at all. It's not really a Canadian thing. The Canadians and government's, again, not interested in it. They don't want that stuff to go on. So no, it's not really a thing, unfortunately. Small pieces, but some naval contributions, that kind of thing, and not much. Oh yeah, Quebec Lever. Yeah. That's when they started getting along again. Yeah, that was dumb. And a lot of people still hate to call for that. Yes, the Duplessis government and the clergy were said to be pro-Vichy because they had a lot of the same ideals. Yeah, it applies into it applies into the whole separation thing. It's complicated. Yeah, they don't see them as like, the mother country or anything like that. It doesn't really work that way. Sorry, I was just reading this as I was putting it up. In the 1993 Somalia affair, Canadian Airborne Regiment murders reformed the military hierarchy mindset in the long run. Given a cover of regiment's rogue behavior was done within. No, we're still dealing with this. I had Charlotte on the channel who's written on this. And I'm still looking at all this stuff. I think it was 2 years ago now. She's fantastic, by the way. And she's from France, not French Canadian. She confuses people because she knows her Canadian stuff, but it's French. She's fantastic if you want to look that up. We talk about Somalia at length in her live stream on the channel about her book because it's part of this. But no, I'd say no. That hasn't changed anything. They got rid of the airborne regiment. It's gone. There's an airborne battalion, part of the RCR. But the regiment is gone. And I don't think they'll ever come back in that regard because of Somalia, because everyone knew about Somalia. A lot of Canadian military stuff nowadays just goes by without most people noticing. Somalia was massive in terms of its domestic audience. I don't know what word to use there. People knowing about it. But no, nothing changed other than getting rid of the regiment. That's it. And Charlotte's up on this stuff. It's what she does for her work. So she knows this stuff. And to me, nothing has changed. This is probably why D&D won't hire me for a job. But it just keeps going. And it's the same problems over and over again. I mean, the Airborne Regiment had all kinds of problems, like neo-Nazis, white nationalists, and use of like Nazi imagery and Confederate imagery and all this crazy stuff. Like it was bad, real bad. But I would say no, we still haven't learned this lesson. They're trying, and we had that whole shebang with the chief of staff having to be rotated in and out almost, was it monthly almost at one point last year before? Nothing has changed. I'd say we're still dealing with these issues, and I don't know what it's going to take, but it's still bad. But no, I'd say even today as a 2024, the answer is no. Yes, lots of anti-Semitism in Quebec and Canada, no doubt. Nope. Nothing major. Maybe a few people, but they sent observers first. But I don't even know if they were in Japan. An American show. Yeah, a lot of people were anti-Semitic. Still are. Yeah, it was dumb. Yeah, real dumb. Yeah, they shouldn't have sent them. It's just they were quote unquote ready to go. Yeah. Cyprus was different, but we'll talk about that maybe in another time. Yep. They thought it was going to solve the problem and make it all go away. It didn't. Yep. Team Canada's can't seem to. Yeah, they never can. No. The retention rates dropped off after Somalia. Yeah, it was bad. Again, Charlotte talks about this at length. Yeah, it was really, really bad. And that's what the 90s was awful. The numbers went down, budgets went down. Kind of talked about at the beginning, but yeah, discipline was garbage. Caused all kinds of problems, and the troops that went over to Afghanistan suffered as a result, as is the Canadian way. No different. Second EAP is the same. Happens in 1915. Happens in 2001. Is it going to happen in the future? Yeah, I can say that with certainty. We're never ready. That's such a quip and such almost a cliche at this point. You're never ready for the war that's coming. Canada is never ready, and Canadians die because of it. And nothing has changed. It hasn't changed, uh, and nobody will do anything about it. Nobody in government, nobody in the bureaucracy, nobody in the military. It won't change, and we're gonna pay in blood again and again and again unless something changes. But we hate spending money, so because spending money in Canada is bad. So it's a whole mess. Yeah, no, it was an awful time period. Awful, awful, awful. Is it changing? We'll see. I still have my doubts. Sorry, I'm just reading. Yes, sorry. Yes, Navy was sent because they were ready to go. They sent destroyers, 3 at the beginning, and yeah, I just finished up writing on them. Can't remember the names off the top of my head. The Nook, and I can't remember. I'm not even going to try. Oh, geez, that's a fantastic question. I don't know. I don't know about those guys very much, to be honest. I have no idea. Maybe I can look into that later. But that's a fascinating one. I mean, they're a small unit, so internally and just shipped off for commando. I don't know. I honestly have no idea. That'd be my guess, but I can't speak for certainty. Icefields Parkway. I don't know what that is. What's the Icefields Parkway? Sorry, I just want to look this up. This sounds familiar now. It's coming to me. I feel like I've Googled this before. Icefields Parkway. Oh, yeah. I think so. Memorials themselves. I don't know. That's an excellent question. I don't know. I've never been there, so I don't know. I mean, if I go there, I would love because I do that everywhere I go. I found the first Special Service Force memorial in Rome that I'm going to be going to. Found it by accident. I don't know. That's a good one. It's probably in the inventory. Like there's a memorial inventory from the government. I mean, doesn't have everything on there. I know it's missing some stuff, but if it would be. No, I don't think so. Doesn't look like it. No, I don't think so. Should be though, but it's kind of not easy. That's terrain, right? Anyway, yeah, that's cool. My rifle was older than I was. Yeah. They'll have to be, and not even party wise. There has to be a major thinking of how we do government in Canada because of what Pat just said. It hasn't changed. Doesn't matter who's in power. Conservative, liberal, makes no difference. Absolutely zero difference. That's probably why D&D doesn't like me. Yeah, I know. I need to get out west. I do badly. It's hard. So expensive. Yeah. Oh yeah, love it, Scouts. Yeah. Well, that's cool. Oh, the Second Mountain. Very cool. Yeah, I don't know about that. I don't think so. No, not really. Yeah, has been for a very long time, and that has never changed. Oh, geez. Canadian troops will see that are a mix of not as rigid as the Brits, but not as wild as the Americans. I wouldn't go that far. Can they be their own brand of crazy? They're just they're troops to do what troops do. They're young. I mean, they're young people, most of them, right? They do what they do. They fight, they drink, they do dumb shit because they're all like 19 years old and 20. Imagine when you think about what you were doing at that time period. I wouldn't say that they were as rigid as the Brits. I mean, some people were, but I wouldn't say it's like an overall characteristic. They did things that young people do. I mean, the Americans, I don't think the Americans were any wilder either, you know. So much pressure bar and then apologize after. Rob, good times. I don't know. I wouldn't say that they. I mean, it's hard. It's hard to say overall, right? Because so many different units are so different at different times. But there's a lot of sitting around, jokingly, of course, in Britain waiting for the invasions, and a lot of time on their hands, and a lot of young guys being dumb and doing dumb things and stealing, and like these are the things I think we can talk about now. They're not perfect angels, never were. They just do dumb crap. I mean, it's not, there's some higher crimes because that happens with any army, murder and rape and whatnot. But I wouldn't say Americans were any wilder. And the Brits were seen to be more rigid, but I also don't agree with that either. Not just with you disagreeing, but you know what I mean? Like, they fought each other all the time. Like when the Canadians got to Hong Kong, one of the first things they did was brawl at a brothel, like with Brits. Like it just undoes every stereotype you can think of. I mean, to me, it's just funny. I don't tend to see them in the nationalities. You know what I mean? They're just young people with weapons and booze. They just do what they do. I mean, yeah, we tried to on the internet like to make everything into a meme, and it just doesn't fit. Well, that's a good one. Geez, that's way back. There's a throwback. Jeez, Rotel Canal, which opened for 6 hours this year for skating, and that's what it's used for now. Is skating when it can, and pleasure boating. Fun. As far as I know, no. I don't think it's directly linked to the canal going over budget. Yeah, sorry, before I go on here, Scott, I want to come back. Yeah, I agree. Yeah, it's like an overall thing that people think is the facts are these are how it was, and it's not. It's just usually because they're younger people, and this is what young people do. I don't think it has anything to do with nationality. But yeah, obviously, as a historian answer, it's more complicated. Yeah. Sorry, yes, going back to sorry, I'm getting emails like crazy. People need to leave me alone. As far as I understood, the fort itself had gone over budget because the plan originally was to ring the city of Kingston with identical forts to what is Fort Henry, and it's been redone since and sat in dilapidated condition for a very long time and used as an internment camp, by the way. That is my understanding, is that was too expensive at the time, and relations were warming with the Americans anyway, so there was no point to ring the city, which was used as the naval yard, right? That was why, not because I just like Kingston so much. Naval yard is again used for pleasure boating and cruises on Lake Ontario, which I've done. It's nice area. But yeah, to protect the naval yard. So to ring the city, defend it from all ways, so they can't get in and mess with the naval yard, because it was the Royal Naval Yard on the Great Lakes. Let's see, I'm running out of words. As far as that's my understanding, I did this a while back. This was during my comps for my PhD, so this was 2016. I don't remember exactly, but that's my understanding. Is that's the overcosts, and it was unnecessary. Because they still stationed Fort Henry for quite a long time, but even by then they kind of felt it was unnecessary. I could be wrong, but I don't think the canal and that are directly linked. But both military projects, though, which people tend to forget. Anyone know about the attempt to sorry, anyone know from anyone know about the attempt to area that became irrigate? Like water? I have no idea. Huh. In my head, it's always getting shot at. Be interested to know more about that, though. Yeah, I mean, yeah, people just fight. Doesn't even matter who. They'll fight themselves. They don't care. They're drunk and young and stupid. We all have been drunk and dumb. You know, those of us who make that age are all dumb and stupid and do dumb, stupid things, in my opinion. In my historical history opinion. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, never because of the treaty. Yeah, same with the Great Lakes, right? There was the treaty. With the Great Lakes, sorry. Yeah, they it limited the amount of armaments. They had to, Second World War, they had to put an exception in because it was still in force. It still is today, but to allow training to go on in Chicago because it's on Lake Michigan. And it pertains to all the Great Lakes, the borders. That doesn't matter. To me, that's wild. A thing like that has such an impact. We had to be. Of course, you can do that. You know, you're not going to invade us anymore. We think we're Plan Red. Anybody? Anyway, yeah. Anymore? I can do this for a little bit longer. I have to take the dog out shortly. But and yes, Muggins is doing well. I think he's full grown now. He's downstairs sleeping. I don't want to bring him up here because then he'll go nuts and try to attack me. And by that, I mean try to want attention and attack my books that are all over the floor from writing. Yeah, so I hope you enjoy this. We can always do more. I love doing these things. It's always great to hang out with you guys. So it's been a while, but I think that's it. Yeah, those are great questions. You guys are really good at these things. So yeah, so what's coming up tomorrow? Right, for those still sticking around. Tomorrow we're having a live stream about the raid. Oh yeah, sorry, just entering over here. Yes. I mean, they've done massive explosion tests. Yeah, they've done all. I mean, that place is just. I don't know if it'll ever be fit for human consumption or the humans ever. Full of stuff. Anyway, yes. So thanks everyone for hanging out. Tomorrow there's a live stream about the Granville raid, a very small raid out of the Channel Islands by the Germans to gain supplies after they were cut off, right? After Normandy, after the Overlord. Germans stayed in Channel Islands till the end of the war. So they had to go get supplies from somewhere. Anyway, so there was lots of fighting there. We'll be talking about that with a personal angle. So please come out to that tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern time. So yeah, so we'll have that. We're supposed to have one with Dave Patterson, but that's going to be pushed to another day. I don't know when yet, because the last thing I want to talk about before signing off here is what'll be coming up, right? We're the first week of March. Lots of glow-in-the-dark vegetables. Yeah, probably. Alberta's finest export is Normandy stuff. Lots coming. It's going to be coming. There'll be less live streams because I'm gone in April for the majority of the month. And then when I get back, it's all hands on deck. Stuff coming out like crazy. I was hoping to have the videos about the Royal Canadian Navy and the Royal Canadian Air Force out before I even left to go to Normandy, but I don't think that's going to happen. I just have so much to do before I leave and other projects to get done before I head out. So yeah, so we'll see. And that said, if you're not already, a lot of you already are watching here are supporters of the channel through YouTube, which I appreciate, and through Patreon. So thank you all so much for help in that area. It means the world to me to keep all this going. Just one of the bigger channels I know, and we all kind of try to support each other, got demonetized overnight for seemingly no reason. So I'm a bit worried, to be honest with you. So I don't know why that happened. I hope it's a glitch in YouTube's system. But again, any support anybody can give is greatly appreciated. And then other than that, I'll see you all tomorrow. So have a good rest of Friday and a good weekend wherever you are. See everybody tomorrow. Bye.